Good afternoon, Aluminum. Happy Friday. We made it to the end of the week, and I thought, sports are canceled right now. I might as well wear our Coyotes hockey jersey. It's Friday. Get comfortable. If you want to sit on the floor like we do in class while I'm reading, do so while we read our next chapter of Harry Potter. All right, chapter 12. The Mirror of Erised. Christmas is coming. One morning in mid-December, Hogwarts woke to find itself covered in several feet of snow. The lake froze solid and the Weasley twins were punished for bewitching several snowballs so that they followed Quirrell around, bouncing off the back of his turban. The few owls that managed to battle their way through the stormy sky to deliver mail had to be nursed back to health by Hagrid before they could fly off again. No one could wait for the holiday to start. While the Gryffindor common room and the Great Hall had roaring fires, the drafty corridors had become icy and a bitter wind rattled the windows in the classrooms. Worst of all were Professor Snape's classes down in the dungeons, where their breath rose in a mist before them and they kept as close as possible to their hot cauldrons. "I do feel so sorry," said Draco Malfoy one potions class, "for all of those people who have to stay at Hogwarts for Christmas because they're not wanted at home." He was looking over at Harry as he spoke. Crabbe and Goyle chuckled. Harry, who was measuring out powdered spine of lionfish, ignored them. Malfoy had been even more unpleasant than usual since the Quidditch match. Disgusted that the Slytherins had lost, he had tried to get everyone laughing at how a wide-mouthed tree frog would be replacing Harry as Seeker next. Then he'd realized that nobody found this funny because they were all so impressed at the way Harry had managed to stay on his bucking broomstick. So Malfoy, jealous and angry, had gone back to taunting Harry about having no proper family. It was true that Harry wasn't going back to Privet Drive for Christmas. Professor McGonagall had come around the week before making a list of students who would be staying for the holidays, and Harry had signed up at once. He didn't feel sorry for himself at all. This would probably be the best Christmas he'd ever had. Ron and his brothers were staying too because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were going to Romania to visit Charlie. When they left the dungeons at the end of potions, they found a large fir tree blocking the corridor ahead. 2 enormous feet sticking out at the bottom, and a loud puffing sound told them that Hagrid was behind it. "Hi, Hagrid. Want any help?" Ron asked, sticking his head through the branches. "Nah, I'm all right. Thanks, Ron." "Would you mind moving out of the way?" came Malfoy's cold drawl from behind them. "Are you trying to earn some extra money, Weasley? Hoping to be gamekeeper yourself when you leave Hogwarts, I suppose. The hut of Hagrid's must seem like a palace compared to what your family's used to." Ron dived at Malfoy just as Snape came up the stairs. "Weasley!" Ron let go of the front of Malfoy's robes. "He was provoked, Professor Snape," said Hagrid, sticking his huge hairy face out from behind the tree. "Malfoy was insulting his family." "Be that as it may, fighting is against Hogwarts rules, Hagrid," said Snape silkily. 5 points from Gryffindor. Weasley, and be grateful it isn't more. Move along, all of you." Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle pushed roughly past the tree, scattering needles everywhere and smirking. "I'll get him," said Ron, grinding his teeth at Malfoy's back. "One of these days I'll get him." "I hate them both," said Harry, Malfoy and Snape. "Come on, cheer up. It's nearly Christmas," said Hagrid. "Tell you what, come with me and see the Great Hall. Looks a treat." So the three of them followed Hagrid and the tree off to the Great Hall, where Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were busy with the Christmas decorations. "Ah, Hagrid, the last tree. Put it in the far corner, would you?" The hall looked spectacular. Festoons of holly and mistletoe hung all around the walls, and no less than 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the room, some sparkling with tiny icicles, some glittering with hundreds of candles. "How many days you got left until your holidays?" Hagrid said. "Just one," said Hermione. "And that reminds me, Harry, Ron, we've got half an hour before lunch. We should be in the library." "Oh yeah, you're right," said Ron, tearing his eyes away from Professor Flitwick, who had golden bubbles blossoming out of his wand and was trailing them over the branches of the new tree. "The library," said Hagrid, following them out of the hall. "Just before the holidays? Bit keen, aren't you?" "Oh, we're not working," Harry told him brightly. "Ever since you mentioned Nicholas Flamel, we've been trying to find out who he is." "You what?" Hagrid said, looking shocked. Listen here, I've told you, drop it. It's nothing to you what your dog's garden, to what that dog's garden. We just want to know who Nicholas Flamel is, that's all, said Hermione. Unless you'd like to tell us and save us the trouble, Harry added. We must have been through hundreds of books already and we can't find him anywhere. Just give us a hint. I know I've read his name somewhere. I'm saying nothing, said Hagrid flatly. Just have to find out for ourselves then, said Ron, and they left. Hagrid looking disgruntled and hurried off to the library. They had indeed been searching books for Flamel's name ever since Hagrid had let it slip, because how else were they going to find out what Snape was trying to steal? The trouble was, it was very hard to know where to begin, not knowing what Flamel might have done to get himself into a book. He wasn't in great wizards of the 20th century or notable magical names of our time. He was missing too from important modern magical discoveries and a study of recent developments in wizardry. And then, of course, there was the sheer size of the library, tens of thousands of books, thousands of shelves, hundreds of narrow rows. Hermione took out a list of subjects and titles she had decided to search while Ron strode off down the row of books and started pulling them off the shelves. Pulling them off the shelves at random. Harry wandered over to the restricted section. He had been wondering for a while if Flamel wasn't somewhere in there. Unfortunately, you needed a specially signed note from one of the teachers to look in any of the restricted books, and he knew he'd never get one. These were the books containing powerful dark magic never taught at Hogwarts and only read by older students studying advanced defense against the dark arts. What are you looking for, boy? Nothing, said Harry. Madame Pince, the librarian, brandished a feather duster at him. You'd better get out then. Go on, out. Wishing he'd been a bit quicker at thinking up some story, Harry left the library. He, Ron, and Hermione had already agreed they'd better not ask Madame Pince where they could find Flamel. They were sure she'd be able to tell them, but they couldn't risk Snape hearing what they were up to. Harry waited outside in the corridor to see if the other two had found anything, but he wasn't very hopeful. They had been looking for 2 weeks after all, but as they only had odd moments between lessons, it wasn't surprising they hadn't found anything. What they really needed was a nice long search without Madame Pince breathing down their necks. 5 minutes later, Ron and Hermione joined him, shaking their heads. They went off to lunch. You will keep looking while I'm away, won't you? Said Hermione, and send me an owl if you find anything. And you could ask your parents if they know who Flamel is, said Ron. It'd be safe to ask them. Very safe, as they're both dentists, said Hermione. Once the holidays had started, Ron and Harry were having too good a time to think much about Flamel. They had the dormitory to themselves and the common room was far emptier than usual, so they were able to get the good armchairs by the fire. They sat by the hour eating anything they could spear on a toasting fork, bread, English muffins, marshmallows, and plotting ways of getting Malfoy expelled, which were fun to talk about even if they wouldn't work. Ron also started teaching Harry wizard's chess. This was exactly like Muggle chess, except that the figures were alive, which made it a lot like directing troops in a battle. Ron's set was very old and battered, like everything else he owned. It had once belonged to someone else in his family, in this case, his grandfather. However, old chessmen weren't a drawback at all. Ron knew them so well he never had trouble getting them to do what he wanted. Harry played with chessmen Seamus Finnegan had lent him, and they didn't trust him at all. He wasn't a very good player yet, and they kept shouting different bits of advice at him, which was confusing. Don't send me there. Can't you see his knight? Send him. We can afford to lose him. On Christmas Eve, Harry went to bed looking forward to the next day for the food and the fun, but not expecting any presents at all. When he woke early in the morning, however, the first thing he saw was a small pile of packages at the foot of his bed. Merry Christmas, said Ron sleepily, as Harry scrambled out of bed and pulled on his bathrobe. You too, said Harry. Will you look at this? I've got some presents. What did you expect, turnips? Said Ron, turning on his own pile, which was a lot bigger than Harry's. Harry picked up the top parcel. It was wrapped in a thick brown paper, and scrawled across it was, To Harry from Hagrid. Inside was a roughly cut wooden flute. Hagrid had obviously whittled it himself. Harry blew it. It sounded a bit like an owl. A second, very small parcel contained a note. "We received your message and enclose your Christmas present from Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia." Taped to the note was a 50-pence piece. "That's friendly," said Harry. Ron was fascinated by the 50 pence. "Weird," he said. "What a shape! This is money?" "You can keep it," said Harry, laughing at how pleased Ron was. "Hagrid and my aunt and uncle. So, who sent these?" "I think I know who that one's from," said Ron, turning a bit pink and pointing to a very lumpy parcel. "Me mum. I told her you didn't expect any presents and—" "Oh no," he groaned. "She made you a Weasley sweater." Harry had torn open the parcel to find a thick, hand-knitted sweater in emerald green and a large box of homemade fudge. "Every year she makes us a sweater," said Ron, unwrapping his own, "and mine's always maroon." "That's really nice of her," said Harry, trying the fudge, which was very tasty. The next present also contained candy, a large box of chocolate frogs from Hermione. This only left one parcel. Harry picked it up and felt it. It was very light. He unwrapped it. Something fluid and silvery gray went slithering to the floor where it lay in gleaming folds. Ron gasped. "I've heard of those," he said in a hushed voice, dropping the box of every flavour beans he'd gotten from Hermione. "If that's what I think it is, they're really rare and really valuable." "What is it?" Harry picked the shining silvery cloth off the floor. It was strange to touch, like water woven into material. "It's an invisibility cloak," said Ron, a look of awe on his face. "I'm sure it is. Try it on." Harry threw the cloak over his shoulders and Ron gave a yell. "It is! Look down!" Harry looked down at his feet, but they were gone. He dashed to the mirror. Sure enough, his reflection looked back at him. Just his head suspended in mid-air, his body completely invisible. He pulled the cloak over his head and his reflection vanished completely. "There's a note," said Ron suddenly. "A note fell out of it." Harry pulled off the cloak and seized the letter. Written in narrow, loopy writing he had never seen before were the following words. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you." There was no signature. Harry stared at the note. Ron was admiring the cloak. "I'd give anything for one of those," he said. "Anything. What's the matter?" "Nothing," said Harry. He felt very strange. Who had sent the cloak? Had it really once belonged to his father? Before he could say or think anything else, the dormitory door was flung open and Fred and George bounded in. Harry stuffed the cloak quickly out of sight. He didn't feel like sharing it with anyone else yet. "Merry Christmas!" "Hey, look! Harry's got a Weasley sweater too!" Fred and George were wearing blue sweaters, one with a large yellow F on it and the other a G. "Harry's is better than ours, though," said Fred, holding up Harry's sweater. "She obviously makes more of an effort if you're not family." "Why aren't you wearing yours, Ron?" George demanded. "Come on, get it on. They're lovely and warm." "I hate maroon," Ron moaned half-heartedly as he pulled it over his head. "You haven't got a letter on yours," George observed. "I suppose she thinks you don't forget your name, but we're not stupid. We know we're called Gred and Forge." "What's all this noise?" Percy Weasley stuck his head through the door, looking disapprovingly. He'd clearly gotten halfway through unwrapping his presents, as he too carried a lumpy sweater over his arm, which Fred seized. "P is for prefect. Get it on, Percy. Come on, we're all wearing ours. Even Harry got one." "I don't want," said Percy thickly, as the twins forced the sweater over his head, knocking his glasses askew. "And you're not sitting with the prefects today either," said George. "Christmas is a time for family." They frog-marched Percy from the room, his arms pinned to his sides by his sweater. Harry had never in all his life had such a Christmas dinner. 100 fat roast turkeys, mountains of roast and boiled potatoes, platters of chipolatas, tureens of buttered peas, silver boats of thick, rich gravy and cranberry sauce, and stacks of wizard crackers every few feet along the table. These fantastic party favors were nothing like the feeble muggle ones that the Dursleys usually bought, with their little plastic toys and their flimsy paper hats inside. Harry pulled a wizard cracker with Fred, and it didn't just bang. It went off with a blast like a cannon and engulfed them all in a cloud of blue smoke, while from the inside exploded a rear admiral's hat and several live white mice. Up at the high table, Dumbledore had swapped his pointed wizard's hat for a flowered bonnet and was chuckling merrily at a joke Professor Flitwick had just read him. Flaming Christmas pudding followed the turkey. Percy nearly broke his teeth on a silver sickle embedded on his slice. Harry watched Hagrid getting redder and redder in the face as he called for more wine, finally kissing Professor McGonagall on the cheek, who, to Harry's amazement, giggled and blushed, her top hat lopsided. When Harry finally left the table, he was laden down with a stack of things out of the crackers, including a pack of non-explodable luminous balloons, a grow-your-own-warts kit, and his own new wizard chess set. The white mice had disappeared, and Harry had a nasty feeling they were going to end up as Mrs. Norris's Christmas dinner. Harry and the Weasleys spent a happy afternoon having a furious snowball fight on the grounds. Then, cold, wet, and gasping for breath, they returned to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, where Harry broke in his new chess set by losing spectacularly to Ron. He suspected he wouldn't have lost so badly if Percy hadn't tried to help him so much. After a meal of turkey sandwiches, crumpets, trifle, and Christmas cake, everyone felt too full and sleepy to do much before bed, except sit and watch Percy chase Fred and George all over Gryffindor Tower because they'd stolen his prefect badge. It had been Harry's best Christmas day ever, yet something had been nagging at the back of his mind all day. Not until he climbed into bed was he free to think about it, the invisibility cloak and whoever had sent it. Ron, full of turkey and cake and with nothing mysterious to bother him, fell asleep almost as soon as he'd drawn the curtains of his four-post bed. Harry leaned over the side of his own bed and pulled the cloak out from under it. His father's. This had been his father's. He let the material flow over his hands, smoother than silk, light as air. "Use it well," the note said. He had to try it now. He slipped out of bed and wrapped the cloak around himself. Looking down at his legs, he saw only moonlight and shadows. It was a very funny feeling. Use it well. Suddenly, Harry felt wide awake. The whole of Hogwarts was open to him in this cloak. Excitement flooded through him as he stood there in the dark and silence. He could go anywhere in this, anywhere, and Filch would never know. Ron grunted in his sleep. Should Harry wake him? Something held him back. His father's cloak. He felt that this time, the first time, he wanted to use it alone. He crept out of the dormitory, down the stairs, across the common room, and climbed through the portrait hole. "Who's there?" squawked the fat lady. Harry said nothing. He walked quickly down the corridor. Where should he go? He stopped, his heart racing in thought. And then it came to him, the restricted section in the library. He'd be able to read as long as he liked, as long as it took to find out who Flamel was. He set off, drawing the invisibility cloak tight around him as he walked. The library was pitch black and very eerie. Harry lit a lamp to see his way along the rows of books. The lamp looked as if it was floating along in midair. Even though Harry could feel his arm supporting it, the sight gave him the creeps. The restricted section was right at the back of the library. Stepping carefully over the rope that separated these books from the rest of the library, he held up his lamp and read the titles. They didn't tell him much. Their peeling, faded gold letters spelled words in languages Harry couldn't understand. Some had no title at all. One book had a dark stain on it that looked horribly like blood. The hairs on the back of Harry's neck prickled. Maybe he was imagining it, maybe not, but he thought a faint whispering was coming from the books, as though they knew someone was there who shouldn't be. He had to start somewhere. Setting the lamp down carefully on the floor, he looked along the bottom shelf for an interesting book. A large black and silver volume caught his eye. He pulled it out with difficulty because it was very heavy, and bouncing it on his knee, let it fall open. A piercing, blood-curdling shriek split the silence. The book was screaming. Harry snapped it shut, but the shriek went on and on, one high, unbroken, ear-splitting note. He stumbled backward and knocked over his lamp, which went out at once. Panicking, he heard footsteps coming down the corridor outside. Stuffing the shrieking book back on the shelf, he ran for it. He passed Filch in the doorway. Filch's pale, wide eyes looked straight through him, and Harry slipped under Filch's outstretched arm and streaked off up the corridor, the book's shrieks still ringing in his ears. He came to a sudden halt in front of a tall suit of armor. He had been so busy getting away from the library he hadn't paid attention to where he was going. Perhaps because it was dark, he didn't recognize where he was at all. There was a suit of armor near the kitchens, he knew, but he must be 5 floors above there. All right, I'm going to stop there for today. We will finish this chapter on Monday to figure out what happens or what else he does with his invisibility cloak. Enjoy your weekend. Until next time.